So today we have Thomas sharing his onboarding project. So we're really excited for Thomas, and thanks team for helping with onboarding. So yeah, Thomas, take it away.
Sure. I'll do a quick round of introductions in an abridged version. So my name is Thomas. I was born and raised in Ontario. I moved to BC after university. I've been a developer for over 10 years. I enjoy hiking and kickboxing, and that's me in a nutshell. So today I will be presenting Helix Experience. So we all kind of understand what Helix is, our product, but what do I mean by experience? And because experience is quite overloaded. There's lots of different types of experiences. There's user experience, there's customer experience. Am I talking about engineering partner experience? Unfortunately, none of those. Today, I will be talking about developer experience. This is the agenda, so I'll go over why, a quick demo, some lessons learned, and finally, I'll have some questions. I'll leave it open to the floor to ask me any questions that they have. So let's begin. Why? It's funny. On my second day at Commit, I saw this message on Slack. Some of the friction that plagued EPs when they were on Helix for a short amount of time was high onboarding setup effort by Fong. So what did Fong mean? High onboarding setup effort? He must be exaggerating. Well, little did I know I was stepping into a world of mess and chaos. But before that, I need to set up my environment. But I'm on Windows. So I don't know who develops on Windows here, but kudos to you. It's a lot challenging and a lot difficult to set up your environment to work with all the different toolings available. As we can see over here, there's a lot of different options to use a virtual environment, operating system. I don't like developing on Windows. I prefer a Unix environment or Linux environment. So, there's VMware, there's Hyper-V Manager, there's VirtualBox, so many different options. I've tried all of these actually in the past or very recently, and I never really liked any of them because my desktop was very, very sluggish. So something I didn't note is I'm using my desktop, my home computer to set up the project and do a lot of these different work on these projects. So it's not as easy for me to get things rolling right off the start. Again, as I mentioned, none of these worked for me. It was very slow. What did work for me was this new thing called Windows Subsystem Linux. So it allows you to run a Linux kernel right inside Windows, and it's a headless operating system. So that's all that I really needed. I didn't need any of the fancy UI or tooling. I just needed a Unix terminal. So why, let's go back into the why. So in here, there are 3 different READMEs about setting up Helix, about setting up the Helix service and the UI. And there's one where it's holistic view of setting up both of those services. Okay. Can I share this? Does this work? Can you guys see this? Okay. So in here, we can see the Helix UI. There's some setup guides, pretty straightforward, how to run it. Now we go to the service. Sorry, let's move this around. We go to the service. Okay, again, there's information how to set up. This one's a lot longer, different branching paths. One for Docker, one for Mac, Linux, cross-platform, how to run. And then finally, what I consider is the main one where it goes over both the UI and the service. So I was following through this guide. I saw set up for local development, Mac experience, that's okay. I'm using Linux, I can still follow along and install all of these. I go through all of these steps. I get near the bottom and then I realize, hey, wait, there's another section for using Docker. I just wasted all of this time setting up everything else, but I didn't realize there's a Docker option where, for those that aren't aware, Docker allows you to set up your environment so it's isolated. You don't have to mess around with your operating system. You don't have to mess around with changing any of your settings. It's all isolated. So as I was going through all of this, I got to a realization that it's really confusing and it takes a very long time. And in some cases, the information is outdated. So how can I make this faster and easier for other developers to just jump right on board and get started? Now I'll go into the demo. Okay, I gotta share this. Can you share? Is there a way to share an entire screen? Not. Okay, so I'm in my Windows terminal. So if I just want to get everything up and running, I just run this command. And I've skipped quite a few different steps, but what's happening is it's starting up the database, the service, and the UI, and have all of them talk to each other. So in the background, it ran the migration, the database migration. So running database queries to ensure that the database is up to date, as well as seed the database, add information into the database such that it's ready to be used. It's started up the service. It's listening on port 9000, so I can make a call to it. Right? It's able to return some data for me. I've mucked around and changed the value. So instead of Pong, it says this. And for the UI, it takes a long time. I don't know if this is common for everyone on the Helix team, or I'm not getting any nods or anything, but it takes a minute or two for the UI.
It shouldn't be a minute.
Okay. Maybe my desktop is really, really slow. Okay, now it's up. So if I go and browse localhost 3000, there we go. So everything is connected. It's able to call the service. If I switch back over here, we can see it's making some calls to the service, this EPS get own user. The database is connected, and yeah, the service is connected. So everything is connected. So, you know, I had my environment kind of partially set up, or I guess in this case, set up already. What does it look from starting from scratch? Well, I took some screenshots because I don't want to bore everyone running the installation, setting up from scratch. It would take about, so this is my environment. I don't have any Docker images. I just have the hello world, the default one. And when you run everything for the first time, it takes about 8 minutes. So I should have did a poll and asked how long it took everyone to set up their environment, but it would take 8 minutes to set up your service, database, and UI, and you can start coding away. This doesn't include the installation time of Docker. So it's not going to take you the full day to set up and install Docker or Docker Compose. So some of the lessons that I've learned, I've never really mucked around with Docker files before. This is kind of the first time I know about Docker files and Docker Compose. It's not until you actually get into the weeds and start working on it that you get a better appreciation and understanding of what it can or can't do. One other thing that I learned is the depends on. So for version 3.x of Docker Compose, the depends on doesn't allow you to specify a condition. So what depends on will do is wait for certain pieces of your infrastructure to start up before actually starting that piece of the infrastructure. So for example, I think I have to share this. Okay, everyone can see my screen. For example, we don't want to start the service until the database is up. So, and likewise, we don't want the UI to start up until the service is up and running. However, even if on version 3 that we have this depends on, it won't guarantee that the database is actually fully up and running. There used to be a parameter called condition, but it's no longer available in 3.x. What I had to do was, let's open Docker. What I had to do was add a simple health check to make sure that the database is up before we start the service, for example. So this will check if your environment is development, and then do a ping to the host and port. And once it's finished, then run the database migration. The other piece that I learned was networking isn't straightforward in some cases when you're working with a containerized environment. So right out of the gate, I couldn't access the UI. Running localhost 3000 didn't work. Sorry, localhost 3000 didn't work. The reason was because the UI is running in a container, and localhost or 127.0.0.1 is with respect to itself. So if we go to let me just make this bigger. So if we look at the startup for the UI, we can see it's binding to 127, the local host. I had to change this to a loopback 0.0, which made it accessible outside of the container. And finally, last point is request for a laptop sooner.
Well, I approved that request a few days ago, so hopefully it will arrive soon.
And that's it for my demo. Any questions?
Yeah, have you already tried to log in after you got everything up?
No, Fong, I didn't set everything up yet. I still don't have the auth0 working properly. I don't know what's wrong. I'll probably ping and bug some folks on Helix.
We have a joint account that it's just on our account. I think we can just throw the keys in and it might work, but
I tried that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll touch base with folks there. I tried that. It didn't work for me.
I see. There was an issue where because we're using the cluster to handle that, we had to use 127.0.0.1. So that was why we had that in the package JSON. Actually, I might be getting this wrong, but yeah, there was some nuances revolving around that.
Okay.
But yeah, well, let's this is awesome, Thomas. Like, it's really going to help us bring on more of the engineer that kind of have just a couple of days, because it does take some time to set it up previously.
Totally, and that was the whole point, to streamline the process, make it simple and easy for developers to just jump right in and start coding away.
Did you think about using something like Kind or K3s or Minikube instead of Docker Compose?
I did think about
Docker
using.
Compose is not really the ideal tool for, like, since we already have everything written in Kubernetes, you'd be able to read a lot of other stuff.
Yeah, I was thinking of using Minikube, but unfortunately, Tim Wan already did a demo on it, so I wanted to try something brand new. I've used Minikube before. I just wanted to play around with Docker. I totally agree. If we can create an environment where it's very similar and consistent with staging and production, it would make the process a lot easier, especially for debugging.
Yeah, for sure. And we'd be able to reuse a lot of the stuff that we already have.
Totally, yeah.
Does Minikube even work on Linux for Windows because I tried this thing before and I could even run Postgres properly. Like it was very buggy, but it was like 2 years ago, so I don't know if it's
Yeah,
better
well,
now.
there are also other projects now. So there's Kind and K3s, which like I think Kind actually just runs inside a Docker container. So as long as you have Docker running, like
Yeah.
it's kind of Kubernetesception because it's like Kubernetes in a
Yeah.
containers inside the container. But yeah, I mean there have been, like this is such a common use case that there's a lot of work going on in that space, and so things have gotten a lot easier to do.
So my question to you is, why do you think it's so important to have good onboarding for a project?
I think that's a great question, and I think at certain times as a developer, once you set up your environment, you kind of leave it alone, right? You get over the initial hurdle, and then you leave it alone. But like all experiences, the first impression is a big one, right? Having something where developers can understand and get the ball rolling really paints a picture of how well and how invested the developers are in creating a tooling or project that anyone can jump in on.
And it's your first week, you don't want to be the slow person, you just want to start coding away. Then it takes like a week. Like once I joined this project and it took me like 2 weeks to get everything set up, which was crazy.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's good to have good documentation. And then, so you mentioned that you never.
Sorry,
sorry.
I was going to show. Eventually, I would like to get us to a point where this is the documentation, where the steps are very simple, straightforward, and can be easily followed and done in a couple of minutes as opposed to days.
Our phone, make it happen. So I'm curious, like how much is it related to Zero itself? Like is it like setting up both Zero on the background and then Helix on top of that? Is that a combination of those, or?
No, they're isolated. I don't know how someone that's more familiar with the infrastructure might be able to chime in, but it's not really built on top of Zero from my understanding.
Right now the dev experience is entirely whatever Helix already had.
Got it.
But Stephen is, I think, working with Fong and Simon to try to schedule some time to try out some of the new dev experience stuff, which I think will also deprecate a bunch of the necessity for having stuff like this, because it's kind of like a hybrid cloud approach. So you don't even need to have these other dependencies running locally. You can just have the one thing that you're working on running locally, and then everything else running in a cloud environment.
Cool. That's good to know. I think for Zero, like now this demo exactly highlights the need of having this multi-developer onboarding and working on project experience, as part of the default, and the benefits for using Zero, right? It's
yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I think, we'd love to get sort of dog fooding that. It's just, the Helix team is already, pressed for time. So we just need to find some time for someone to be the guinea pig.
Yeah. Maybe Thiago, maybe you can try this out once we build it out, because once you announce, once the patch is in the public, you're gonna hire lots of people. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. Like one thing that because we do use Docker on our infrastructure, but we try to stay away from it on our local environment, just because it's a little easier to work with. Like it's a little faster. So this is my only criticism of your work. Like it's great, but what if I don't want to use Docker? Because there's always the guy, oh, I don't like Docker. I'll run my own thing.
I think we have to be careful. Yeah. providing too many different options. I think in some cases you might have to provide them more of opinionated. But yeah, flexibility is always a good thing.
You mentioned that you didn't have experience with Docker Compose before.
No.
And how was the experience of learning the new tool and playing around with it?
I think it was pretty straightforward. There weren't anything like gotchas. I did have to search and figure out what each of these parameters did and what they meant. But it was really nice to start plugging away, adding these parameters and having the system pick it up and use that as part of the build.
If you had more time to work on this, what else would you add or change?
Well, I'd actually try to get the Helix sign up and signing in working so that someone can actually do a bit more testing and validating that things are working with the UI and the service and the database all combined together. And as Bill mentioned, like using Kind or K3S, I think that those are other areas that I can look into. Or I guess in the ultimate goal is to dog food 0 and have that be part of Helix as well, from your local setup and all the way to production setup.
Did you hit any roadblock or something you couldn't figure out, or something that was hard about this project?
Yeah, for me, I think the challenging part is having to run this multiple times, because I'm starting the environment from scratch every time I start my Docker images. They're always at a clean slate, and then getting everything installed does take like 8 minutes, as you guys can see, as everyone can see. So it kind of adds up over time. So 8 minutes times whatever. But this is necessary to allow any new developers to have the same type of experience, right? If I get it working once and I think that it's going to work for everyone, that's not always the case. So repeating the steps multiple times to validate and make sure all the components are working together takes time. And that's sort of things I learned is appreciate it, like a DevOps getting the environment in a good place such that any developers can get going. It takes a lot of effort. It requires a lot of care in order to make it a seamless experience for developers. In terms of technical roadblock, I kind of mentioned before, like depends on something I would have assumed if I added a health check as an example, that would have automatically validated that the database was up before the service ran. It wasn't the case. It was deprecated or removed in version 3. And then the networking piece where I couldn't use 127 or localhost. I had to use bind it to IP zeros.
Yeah, that is an extremely common problem. Like that happens all the time. It's become like the first thing that I ask if somebody says they're having trouble with Docker. It's like, are you binding to localhost? Yeah, change that to 0000.
I'm pretty sure there's another way to check if Postgres is ready. I think they have this PG is ready thing now that you can use. I'm using that on GitHub Actions. It makes it pretty easy to check. So what's your favorite thing about this project?
However, the service can't call PG is ready. It doesn't have, they're isolated containers, right? They don't have commands.
Oh, I see. Okay. Makes sense. So I had a question for you. What's your favorite thing about this project?
I think the favorite thing was just to get exposure to Docker, Docker Compose, and I also got some exposure to Connects, the database migration for inside Helix service. I've never worked with Connects before, and I don't like it. I don't know if anyone does. It's quite bloated.
Yeah, I never worked with it, so I don't know.
Yeah. There's, oops. So yeah, I just created a migration. It's pretty straightforward.
Cool. Does anyone have questions for Thomas? All good. Awesome. Thank you so much, Thomas, for sharing
Awesome.
your projects. Pretty cool.
Cool. Thank you so much. Appreciate everyone's time.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Tom.
Thanks.
Thank you. Take care.
Great work,
Hey.
Thomas.
Bye-bye.